The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was a mass murder that occurred on February 14, 1929, at a garage located at 2122 North Clark Street in Lincoln Park, Chicago. The attack involved a mass shooting and mass murder, with the perpetrators using 2 Tommy guns and 2 shotguns. 7 people were killed during the incident. It's time for us to get our learn on, so buckle up and let's feed our brains some fucking knowledge nuggets.
When you think of Chicago in the 1920s, a few things probably come to mind.
Yeah, a few things come to mind.
Al Capone and the Mafia.
Like subscribing to
During Prohibition, Chicago was a hotbed of Mafia activity.
Subscribe to my channel too if you have a chance.
Al Capone was the most notorious gangster in the city, and he controlled much of the illegal liquor trade. Countless movies, TV shows,
hey, there's our narrator,
have romanticized this time.
I'm digging his style.
Corruption, and fedora-clad killers.
Sharp, OG.
But even the most gritty Hollywood producers
Tommy gun.
can't touch the aura of shock and horror that gripped the Windy City on February the 14th, 1929.
St. Valentine's Day.
In a Lincoln Park garage that day would become known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
That's a lot of bodies.
And remains one of the grisliest unsolved mystery in Mafia history.
Oh, that's a reenactment. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries.
Chicago was already
yeah, they never did find out who did that, did they?
Before
I don't know. We're going to have to find out.
Prohibition
I don't fucking know. That's why I'm watching.
Paved the way for more intelligent, ruthless, and organized gangs to emerge. And it was in this
bloodthirsty
era of dry America that men like Al Capone capitalized on the illegal alcohol market, organized extensive networks of criminals, and fought for territorial rights with other crime syndicates.
Dude made up.
Despite being just 30 years old at the time of the massacre, Capone was not new to the organized crime game. He'd been active in Johnny Torrio's notorious New York street gang since dropping out of school after the 6th grade. In 1920, Capone followed Torrio to Chicago, where the two took advantage of the growth industries spawned by Prohibition, while simultaneously building legitimate businesses and cultivating influence with public officials, labor unions, and employee associations. Just 5 years later, Capone was the boss, controlling Chicago's Italian South Side and leading an underground network of smugglers that extended to Canada, all the while enjoying political and law enforcement protection. His penchant for custom suits, cigars, and bombing speakeasies that refused to purchase liquor from him, while simultaneously making large donations to charities, made him...
What the fuck? Is that true? Did Al Capone really bomb speakeasies? Hold on a second. I mean, I'm not saying I don't believe him, but... I mean, maybe. Maybe he did. I've never heard that. Honestly, I never heard that. While sources don't specifically mention Al Capone personally, oh, come on, dude. Give me a fucking break. Like, I'm not saying that he personally went in there and did it. He was a key figure in the Chicago gang wars during the Prohibition era. Fucking course we know that shit. Which involved violence and intimidation tactics, including bombings. Fuck, man, I didn't know they were bombing shit. I just figured it was just the Tommy gun, standing on the side of the vehicles, just trying to get the fuck out of there while shooting everything in sight along the way. Yo, man, I didn't know that shit. Yep, including bombings was a feature of the era and related to Capone. Of course, he's going to say, fucking wasn't me. I didn't fucking do that shit. What the fuck you talking about? Not me. All right,
let's go. Household name. A man who could walk into a room and evoke both fear and admiration.
He's giving back to the poor.
Capone was also a significant problem for other gangsters looking to turn a profit in the Chicago area. The territory each gang controlled was key to its power, influence, and profit, and so the battle to gain more was never ending. While Capone's grip on the South Side was undebatable, the Irish North Side gang had a monopoly on the local supply of real beer and high-quality whiskey.
I don't know, not for long.
The gang refused to sell portions of their North Side distilleries to the South Siders, ratcheting up tension between the groups that culminated in an assassination attempt on Capone in 1926. Northsider George Bugs Moran and his men showered a hotel where Capone was eating with more than 1,000 bullets. Miraculously, Capone emerged unharmed, but with a bitter resolve to execute revenge.
1,000
Bugs
bullets.
Moran wasn't an easy man to take down. Like Capone, he had been involved in organized crime since he was a teen and had been jailed 3 times before his 21st birthday.
They both ate really well.
He fled to Chicago and found his home with the North Side Gang, an established criminal organization with strong ties to the Chicago
Corrupt
police.
ass fucking
Moran
cops,
despised Capone
Some
so
things
openly
never change.
that most of Chicago knew of his hatred.
Not to say all cops in Chicago are corrupt. Not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that maybe some cops in Chicago may or may not turn the other cheek when shit goes down.
As a Catholic, he was disgusted by the prostitution ring that supplemented the South Side's criminal purse. Moran was also a devoted ally to North Side leader Jaime Weiss, who was killed in retaliation for the attempt on Capone's life. The bitter contempt between Moran and Capone was palpable. Such was the state of the Chicago mob turf war on February the 14th, 1929, as Moran's men arrived at the SMC
There's no chance for any
Cartridge
Five Families
Company
business
garage
happening in
on
Chicago.
Clark Street. The dimly lit garage was used for storage and repairs, and was also the proposed rendezvous point for a truckload of bargain-priced whiskey. 7 men, all dressed in suits and ties with the exception of a mechanic in coveralls, entered the garage. Johnny May, a former safe blower hired by Moran as an auto mechanic. The Gusenberg brothers, Frank and Peter, 2 of the city's most troublesome goons.
Yeah, I was going to say,
James
they look
Clark,
like a couple troublemakers, don't they?
Albert Kachelik, a convicted armed robber and a reputed killer.
Yeah, he's got some fury in those eyes.
A.K.A. Frank Snyder,
yeah, he looks
an
a little respectable.
and embezzler. Albert Weinshank, a nightclub owner and a newly appointed official of the Central Cleaners and Dyers Association. And an optometrist named Reinhardt H.
I mean, old dude back here, hold on. The dude kind of looks like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, doesn't he?
And embezzler. Reinhardt
My bad.
Cleaners and Dyers Association. And an optometrist named Reinhardt H. Schwimmer, who hung around the Moran gang to gamble and rub elbows with the dangerous crowd. The men were waiting on Bugs, who was running late when a black Cadillac stopped in front of the garage. Neighbors watched as 4 or 5 men got out. One wearing a chinchilla topcoat and grey fedora, another 2 in police uniforms.
No shit, dressed in style.
Minutes later, popping noises began to ring out. A backfiring in.
Dude, there's no way that dude didn't get blood all over his chinchilla fancy-ass fucking fur coat. I mean, he had to have.
The neighbors thought.
All I'm saying. You
the
know,
men re-emerged, drove away,
why'd you dress
and the streets
so nice?
fell silent. A man who lived nearby walked over and pushed open the door to the garage. The floor was covered in mutilated bodies. Dark blood covered the concrete.
Yeah, see, they're not going to show it on YouTube, and I can't either. But I will tell you this. You can go to Wikipedia and type in St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The very first image that it shows on Wikipedia, not like R-rated Wikipedia, not like Wikipedia dot whatever.com or some shit. I think it's .org and Wikipedia, whatever. If you go to the Wikipedia page of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the very first image you'll see are the graphic images of those who were murdered. And yeah, it shows it in the detail that you might imagine, and they're actual photos. So they're not going to show it here. I can't show it here because it's YouTube, but if you want to see anything that's below this line here in this image, go over to the Wikipedia page for a St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and you'll see.
Floor and slipped into a drain.
Because this is where he got that image from. He got that same image from there, but he had to crop it.
One of the men was still alive.
YouTube is just too sensitive.
That man was Frank Gusenberg. He'd been shot 14 times, but was still clinging to life as police arrived on the scene.
He
was taken to hospital where detectives desperately questioned him. But Gusenberg abided.
Yeah, he was the dude that lived. Okay. Like, to be honest, I read a little bit of that Wikipedia shit when I was just, like, getting ready to see if I wanted to do this video or not. And, yeah, it turns out I did want to. They said that shit on Wikipedia, that there was one dude who survived. Not ultimately survived. He died a few days later or some shit. But he was coherent enough to talk to the cops, and he wouldn't give up anybody. He's like, I don't know anything. I don't know what the hell he said verbatim, but he didn't give up anybody. But he was coherent enough. He was lucid enough to talk to the cops, but he didn't give up a fucking name or anything at all. Didn't give up anything. But the other ones, they were dead on arrival, or when whoever the cavalry rolled up and got to see what the hell was going on in there, and everybody else was done for. But this dude, I didn't know he was shot 14 fucking times. And then he went to the hospital and still managed to at least be able to hear the cops and answer accordingly. But yeah, he didn't give up a name. He could have solved the whole mystery right then and there, but he didn't. Took it to his grave.
To name the killers who had lined up and murdered his brother and friends in his final hours of life, stating, "No one shot me."
I ain't no fucking snitch.
Hours later, despite Gusenberg's silence, most believed,
even though he's on his deathbed, he had to have known that.
Al Capone. The North Siders and South Siders feud was a poorly kept secret, and
which, by the way, if you're not too familiar with Al Capone, there's his scar. Scarface, that's the scar that they speak of.
The North Siders and South Siders feud was a poorly kept secret, and Moran was supposed to be at the garage that morning.
Killed.
He had shown up, in fact, just after the murders, but scampered away when he saw the police cars, suspecting his garage was being raided. Capone, too, was absent from the crime scene that centered around the two mobsters. He sat over 1,000 miles away in a Dade County, Florida courthouse.
Yeah, of course he did.
Awaiting an interview with a prosecutor investigating.
It couldn't have been Al Capone. He was nowhere near Chicago.
By the time he emerged from the meeting, news of the massacre had spread coast to coast. In Chicago,
yeah, that was some sensational shit,
from the murder scene that turned the city's collective stomach.
7 men gunned down?
Even in black and white, the images conveyed how deeply the city had spiraled into evil. Citizens and law enforcement
it just looks like a pile of bodies. Well, it was, technically.
Capone's alibi was airtight.
Even though one of them, did they illustrate that in the image? One of them, yeah, right here, there was a guy that was leaning on a chair. He was shot. I don't know if he fell into the chair or he wasn't sitting on it, because when they found him, he was leaning like face down on the chair, but he was still in like a kneeling position. It was fucking crazy looking. But again, if you go to the Wikipedia page, they show one image that's, I think it's roughly this view that you're seeing here, but then they show another angle from over here pointing this direction. And you can see this dude like leaning, like just laying on the chair. Like his torso is laying on the seat of the chair. Meanwhile, everybody else was laying as you see here. So I just want to point that out, that one of the guys was laying in an awkward position up on that chair.
The city had spiraled into evil. Citizens and law enforcement alike were desperate for an arrest. Capone's alibi,
and they would never get one, I don't think.
Airtight. But it didn't matter.
Fucking tight.
Public resentment over the mob had reached boiling point, and other suspects were scant. There was little evidence aside from the bodies and vague descriptions from witnesses. Theories arose and were quickly discarded.
2 shotguns, where's the Tommy guns?
Perhaps it was the work of the police. After all, 2 of the killers were dressed in uniform.
That's actually a pretty good question.
Unsurprisingly,
maybe it was the cop.
Law enforcement promptly discarded that theory.
Well, of course, they don't want one of their own being involved in that.
Responsible.
Might make them look bad.
Maybe the men had been insubordinate or crossed him. But even though Moran escaped the massacre with his life, his career was finished, and his gang never recovered.
Well, there
a man
you go.
Whose team can be wiped out without so much as a fight.
That dude with that mustache. What the fuck are you doing, dude?
Any longer.
Is that some kind of joke?
Theory eyed the Detroit-based Purple Gang.
It was fashionable back then.
Which was supposedly the outfit the whiskey shipment was coming from that day. There were theories about politicians, other mobsters, and angry business partners. But nothing seemed to add up. Moran's men hadn't as much as pulled a gun, and their bodies were untouched. Thousands of dollars were found in their pockets. Police were no closer to the truth a month later when Herbert Hoover was sworn in as the 31st president of the United States and eager to make a grand gesture that fulfilled his promise to combat organized crime.
You know what? That actually makes sense though, because if they were rummaging through their pockets and whatnot, old dude who got shot 14 times and survived, they would have noticed him still alive, right? And then they would have, blown him away accordingly. But they must have just shot the hell out of him and just took the fuck off and like immediately just took off. Well, I mean, imagine all that gunfire sound that's going off in the middle of Chicago. I mean, I'm sure that's probably why they hightailed it the hell out of there. It was probably loud as fuck in there.
Capone and he pressured prosecutors to find a way to take him down no matter the evidence. In December of 1929, a well-known bank robber named Fred Burke was found with a small arsenal of weapons, including two machine guns used in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But he was never charged with the crime, and any questioning police may have done was never made public. Burke died in prison.
Never made public? Why wouldn't they make it public now?
Murder. Why wouldn't police jump on this easy suspect? Why not pursue justice with a man who held the murder weapons? Were they trying to keep the focus on Capone? Nothing brought us closer to an answer until 1935.
It would have been stupid as hell because he wasn't anywhere near there.
When another bank robber named Byron Bolton
doesn't mean he didn't order it.
He knew who committed the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He named Burke and 4 other men and claimed he was the lookout for the job.
What?
He said he gave the signal when he saw Albert Weinshank and mistook him for Moran. Bolton's statements were backed up by the widow of a perpetrator named by Bolton and William Drury, a Chicago detective. But by the time Bolton made his supposed confession, all but 2 of the men he named were dead. Another had an alibi. There was little interest in pursuing the lead when Hoover had already achieved what he wanted. In 1931, Capone was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison.
He went to Alcatraz, I think.
The most notorious gangster in America was off the streets. Prohibition had been repealed, and the Southsiders of Chicago had slipped back to the slimy underbelly of the city in a web of prostitution, gambling, and racketeering. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre is still unsolved, and Moran's garage on Clark Street was demolished in 1967 to make way for a parking lot. The brick wall where the execution...
Yeah, I was going to say, they actually took that brick wall and they put it up in some law enforcement museum. They actually took it apart brick by brick, and then they rebuilt it in some museum. He might actually say it's like some law enforcement museum, and it still even has like the crown circles where the detectives circled all the bullet holes in the bricks. And they got it on display somewhere. They also have all the bullets that they dug out of all 7 of those men. They've got all those on display too. It's crazy.
Took place was purchased by a Canadian businessman and displayed in various crime-related novelty displays.
There you go. Let me see. Does it say where it's at? Yeah, courtesy of the Arthur Nash collection. So this museum that has it on display, they might not actually own the bricks and all that shit, but I mean, yeah, they got it on display in some law enforcement.
Most of the bricks were bought by the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, where visitors...
The Mob Museum. See, now he's got me wanting to go look up that article, but I can't look it up because it's going to show all those pictures.
You can still see them today. But perhaps the most significant remnant of the massacre is not in Vegas, nor even Chicago, but at the FBI archives in Washington, D.C. A letter containing the cramped, tidy script of a Chicago man named Frank T. Farrell could hold the truth behind the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Though ignored by police, Byron Bolton's claims were widely published by the media. And Frank Farrell, an undercover investigator, took notice. After reading Bolton's version of events, he penned a letter to John Edgar Hoover, dated January 28, 1935. The letter outlined Farrell's personal theory about the massacre. William Davin Jr., son of a Chicago police sergeant, had been shot during a bar fight in November 1928 at the C&O restaurant, a popular gangster hangout. As Davin Jr. lay dying in the hospital, he confided in his cousin, William White, that he had been shot by some members of Moran's gang, including one of the Gusenberg brothers. William White had another name in Chicago, Three-Fingered Jack, and he was one of the city's most notorious criminals with a reputation for brutality. According to Farrell's letter, White decided to avenge his cousin and had an easy way to do so. White and the Gusenbergs had allegedly worked together on a 1926 robbery along with several other men. When one of their accomplices began ratting them out to the cops, White sent 2 men disguised as cops to the rat's home, where they murdered him. Farrell alleges that White contacted the Gusenbergs and suggested they hit another factory. The Gusenbergs enlisted Moran's gang to help, and they arranged a meeting at the garage on Clark Street to hammer out the details.
Ooh.
Farrell's theory resolves many of the mysteries
Ruthless.
surrounding the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It explains why so many of Moran's men were at the garage that morning, dressed for a business meeting. It explains why they didn't fire their guns at the intruders, and explains why 2 of the perpetrators were wearing police uniforms. White knew they put witnesses at ease and allowed killers to flee without haste or notice. He also had an easy access to them,
really fucking
and it
ruthless.
provides a clear motive
They wore
with
police
enough
uniforms.
emotional power to explain the sheer depravity of the massacre. It may even explain why the investigation went nowhere. Perhaps the police department knew the murders were committed in retaliation for the slaying of a child of one of their own, and because White went on to be a federal informant and supplied the FBI with dirt on Chicago's worst criminals in exchange for protection. It's possible that J. Edgar Hoover knew the truth himself and buried it in the archives along with Farrell's letter.
That's crazy.
But which
Sounds like we got to do some
you
digging.
believe to be true?
Get a hold of the Trump
ones
administration.
mentioned, or perhaps you have an entirely different take. Let us
Gotta
know
get
in
Cash
comments
Patel on it.
below.
I bet he might
And
release
if
that
you'd
shit.
like to help support the show and gain access to a few bonus episodes, consider becoming a channel member.
Yeah, there goes. See it
Right
highlighted.
then. Take care,
You join.
and I'll see you
Subscribe.
next time with another.
All right, most notorious gangland slaying in history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, infamous. Almost everybody's heard of that. Anyway, before I go, I did find it. So this is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre wall. And according to Wikipedia, it's at the National Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement. So, I mean, I think he mentioned something about the FBI or on display somewhere having to do with the FBI. So maybe that's in the FBI building for all I know. I honestly don't know, but wherever the Organized Crime and Law Enforcement Museum is, that's where the St. Valentine's Day Massacre wall is located. So anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.